Okay, the greatest hero of the era, y'all, was Charles Lindbergh. I mean, there's never been one person, probably even today, that was the hero of everybody like this man was. He'd been a pilot flying the mail around the country, and that's where he learned his great flight skills. He was a Minnesota guy. His father had been, I think, a congressman or something. But what he did that was so amazing was he flew by himself all the way from New York to Paris. Now, a man by the name, I think, of Ortigue had offered a prize. I think it was $50,000, which was a lot of money back then, for the first people that could fly across the Atlantic. Now, two British guys, Alcock and Brown, had flown an old British Vickers Vimy across the from Newfoundland to Ireland, but that's much shorter. And but this had to be from New York to Paris. And others, I mean, a lot of people tried, and a lot of people died to be able to do this. And Lindbergh broke all the rules. Others would use multiple engine planes with multiple pilots, even a mechanic on board, and they didn't make it. What he chose to do was a single plane with a single engine plane with a single pilot. And here you're going to see a video of him taking off on that amazing flight.
A lanky young airmail pilot, Charles Lindbergh, captured the imagination of the world by attempting to fly alone straight across the Atlantic. His plane had no radio, no gauges for the gas tanks. It was called the Spirit of St. Louis.
Now, because it was called the Spirit of St. Louis, y'all, because he got donations from businessmen to do it. The plane was made in San Diego, flown across the country by him to acquaint himself with it, and then he took off from New York in May of 26, 27 to do this flight. He was kept awake all night as people readied the plane, nervousness and all of that. And he'd done everything to reduce weight. People said, you need to take a radio. Radio's too heavy, he said. You need to take a lifeboat, something that you, in case you go down in the water. No, too heavy. He didn't even have a windshield, y'all. You notice this is closed and covered here. That was so he could fill this last bit with fuel. Now, he flies for over 33 hours, the 3,000 plus miles, y'all, to get to Paris. He lands at night, and when he landed, he had enough fuel that he could have still made his way to Moscow. Overnight, he becomes not just the most famous man in America, the most famous man in the world. All kinds of offers come his way to make money. And to his credit, he didn't do a whole lot of those, but he did meet a girl who did have money by the name of Anne Morrow. And together, he and Anne become the first kind of power couple. They explored together, they traveled around together. And what he developed, and I've seen this way on a star test before, is he developed the first passenger routes. If you fly today, I don't care where, San Diego to New York or whatever, he probably made that flight. He probably was the first to fly it and to get those air routes down on paper. He extended them to the Caribbean, all the way to the bottom of Latin America. And so he was very, very responsible, y'all, for us being able to fly like we do today. And that was a tribute to him. His nickname was Lucky Lindy, or the Lone Eagle. But then, y'all, celebrity took a very, very high price for him. He and his wife, Anne, had moved to Hopewell, New Jersey, where they had a decent-sized home. And they had a nanny caring for their child, little blonde-haired boy by the name of Charles Lindbergh Jr., right? One night, the family, y'all, they're downstairs, and they kind of hear a boom, boom on the side of the house. They don't think anything about it. But when the nanny goes up to finally check on the baby in its crib, the nanny finds the boy is missing and finds an envelope, right, with instructions to contact or instructions basically saying the baby has been kidnapped and they will be told later how much to pay and how to do so. Now, Lindbergh, through actually a teacher, was ultimately able to pay in gold certified dollars, which made them easy to trace, it turned out, the kidnapper several $1,000s. The kidnapper had even sent a piece of cloth from the baby's clothes that it had that night to prove that the baby was okay. And they even sent instructions how to feed the baby and what it liked to eat and it didn't like. And he said the baby's being taken care of very well and everything like that. Well, after paying the money, Lindbergh is given instructions where to go, where the baby will be. On a boat. Lindbergh goes there. The boat's not there. Lindbergh flies around all over the East Coast, y'all, looking for a boat matching the description, hoping to find his child. Never does. Sometime later, two guys are in a truck. They're driving not too far, maybe from Dobie to Moore Elementary over there. They're driving their truck, and they pass. One of them decides, hey, I got to go to the bathroom, man. Can you stop? And so they stop, and the guy goes off into the woods to go to the bathroom. And he's looking, and he sees what looks like a little hand sticking up out of the dirt. Skeletonized, though. And he goes over and moving some leaves and stuff, he finds the remains of what turns out to be the Lindbergh baby, still in the clothes it wore that night. Now, what we think happened is, although the man who was arrested, who had the money on him, who was a carpenter, who the wood in his garage matched the wood of the ladder, was this ladder, y'all, after he had gotten into the room where the baby was and carried the baby down the stairs, one of the rungs had broken. And we think when that happened, he dropped the baby, and there was a concrete abutment sticking out from a lower window, and they think the baby hit that or hit the concrete because its head was smashed in. And so the baby died quite quickly, but he'd been lying the whole time. This destroyed Lindbergh in a lot of ways, made him give up on the United States for a while, and he and his wife moved to England. They were there for a while until invited by the German government, and yep, that's the Nazis in power, to come over and visit there. Now, seeing the size of the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, he came to the conclusion that there was nobody that could stop it. And he literally advised America's ambassador, Joseph Kennedy, the father of future John F. Kennedy, that Britain wouldn't be able to make it. And believing that Britain would fail, what he decided to do was come back to America and encourage Americans to stay out of the war by what he called the America First Committee. He believed that the Soviets were a bigger threat and that we should somehow maybe try to make a deal with the Germans that would let them keep Europe, but leave us alone. And because of this, y'all, he was portrayed as a coward. Statues of him were painted yellow. He was not allowed to join our Air Force when he asked to do so when we went to war. But on his own, he went and trained some American pilots out in the Pacific, teaching them how to. Okay, y'all, yesterday in first period here, we stopped with the Great Migration. And we talked a little about this. I've talked about this, remember when I talked about during and after World War I, many African Americans moved to the north, to New York and Chicago. There will be a similar migration. Remember how AP always likes to make those connections to different times of not just African Americans, but white Americans, Hispanic Americans out west as well during World War II, and actually kind of reversing it, coming back to the South, because a lot of your jobs during World War II and in the years after the war in the defense industry would be in places like Texas, Florida, California, Arizona, the so-called Sun Belt. Now, we saw this historian yesterday, and you can see here the Great Migration that went up until about the Great Depression. It kind of came to a stop with that. Why did they do this? Well, you can see some things here, y'all, and this would be a kind of a graph that AP might give you, where we see things like the original Klan is founded, but eventually the first Klan is stopped with the Ku Klux Acts of 1871. Then, of course, you get your Jim Crow laws passed because Plessy versus Ferguson allowed separate but equal facilities in the 1890s on. And then, of course, with the movie birth of a nation and a lot of the issues of the 20s, as we'll see, you get a second clan founded. And so when that happens, you see once again, more African Americans moving up north. Although should be noted that the new clan was actually biggest, not in the South, but in the state of Indiana, which is kind of surprising. So African Americans had to go pretty far north. And then you can kind of see during the Great Depression and into the second, into the civil rights movement, not as many African Americans were moving up north. So you can see a lot of it is in direct response to the segregationist laws, racial attacks, and things like that. Simply too, y'all, to find jobs. A lot of them didn't like being farmers, understandably, especially sharecroppers, where they had to share a lot of their crop with the owner of the farm and never could seem to get ahead. And it's these African Americans moving up north, particularly to places like New York. It's going to pave the way for the Harlem Renaissance that AP and Star both really like you guys to know. Now, yesterday, you guys saw me wearing a shirt featuring The Great Gatsby. The author of The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald, shown right here, is the man who called this era the Jazz Age. In fact, he wrote a book called Tales of the Jazz Age, and that was one of his more popular books. Now, jazz, of course, was one of the most popular styles of music during this time, right? And I'm going to show you just some samples. One thing I find, and maybe you guys will find as you guys get older, when I was y'all's age, I liked pretty much a defined set of music, from only a few years before my birth. After that, I was just too old. But as I've gotten older, y'all, I've gone back to like music that was a lot further. And maybe, I hope, if you don't already, you guys will give jazz a chance, especially 20s and 30s and 40 jazz by people like Louis Armstrong and some others, okay? And there you see Louis. Learned to play in New Orleans. Satchmo, he was called. All right. Duke Ellington. There's the Duke. Now, this is just a jam session of some jazz musicians. No credit to strangers, but welcome. Now, this is more early 30s. There's the Duke. There are the other musicians showing up. And jazz, as you guys probably know, it's kind of famous for its spontaneity, its extemporaneous nature. Oh, Ray, man. Ray, I think, is the guy who came up with Take the A Train. I may be wrong on that, but. So you got Duke Ellington. Now here's. This is quite a few years later, but you're hearing the A Train in the background. Take the A Train, which was a train to Harlem, where Harlem was. So, some great music. Don't mean a thing if it ain't got a swing.
You ain't got that swing. That don't mean a thing. All you gotta do is swing.
Now, they would perform in clubs like the Apollo, which was an African-American club, or at the Cotton Club, which was, ironically, a club where African-Americans performed, but African-Americans weren't allowed to attend. Whites could go there, and kind of weird and messed up, but sadly, that's the way the times were. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And there was one, it's called Becky Dorothy Dandridge. It was like it was set in Cotton.
Now, Dorothy Dandridge, you said? Yeah, she was an actress, right? An African-American actress.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it was a play about her?
Yeah, it was kind of like a little she got murdered.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting story, yeah. And oh, well, that's neat.
Yeah, they sang that song.
Oh, okay. Don't mean a thing if it ain't, yeah. Oh, a great song. Now, more about the Harlem Renaissance here. It was more, of course, than just music. Music is perhaps the most accessible thing. It's a period of great creativity. Doesn't mean that there weren't other periods of great creativity, but for the first time, it was getting national attention. People from around the country began to come there, began to read the books, look at the art, and do things like that. And like I said, the Great Migration had helped do this. Now, I've mentioned Louis Armstrong before. I mentioned Duke Ellington. Now, Josephine Baker was an amazing American dancer. Later, she moved to France and even, some people believe, acted as a spy over there, for example, on behalf of the Allies. Billie Holiday. Oh, my gosh, y'all. Billie Holiday can just absolutely bring you to tears. And there's been some good movies recently about her life. Sadly, she got addicted to heroin, and it took a great talent from us, as drugs have a lot before. The Apollo Club, right? I mentioned the Cotton Club. There you see the Apollo, right? This was for African Americans, and African American artists appeared there in New York. And you saw this one already. Apologies for this. There's the Cotton Club, no longer with us. But here's Billie. Now this is, yeah. There's a strange fruit.
Blood on the leaves and blood at the roots.
So southern trees have a strange fruit. Get it? Black body swinging.
In the summer breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees.
So it's obviously talking about the lynchings in the South. She's also famous for the God Bless the Child. So many great songs.
Bulging eyes,
Oh, man.
and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolia, sweet and fresh. Then the sudden smell of burning flesh.
Yeah.
Here is a fruit for the crows to pluck.
Oh. I mean, the images that she's painting, y'all.
Rain together, brought away to south, for the sun to rise, for the tree to dry.
I mean, and believe it or not, y'all, a song like that, you could easily see on an AP test the lyrics, right? Talking about what had become too common in the American South, the lynching of predominantly African Americans in the South. Now, as far as writers go, you guys should be familiar with Langston Hughes, okay? You see one of his books here, The Weary Blues, okay? And also the lady writer, Nora Neale Hurston, very, very famous for her book, Their Eyes Were Watching God. So these books weren't just popular among African Americans, but they became popular among the general American population and helped educate a lot of white Americans more about the Black experience, and very, very important to this day. Now here's Josephine Baker. Now this is early days. This is when she is a flapper big time. See the Charleston? My wife has a great poster of Josephine Baker, but so you get an idea. I mean, we're just touching a little bit, but definitely look at that some more. Now, the day before yesterday, I wore a shirt I'd gotten in the Bahamas of Marcus Garvey. Now, Marcus Garvey was a Jamaican immigrant who came here, and he founded a group known as the Universal Negro Improvement Association. He is very likely to be on an AP test or on your STAR test. And then, of course, designed the flag that today is often associated with the African movement, right? You see that flying a lot in various protests or whatever. What he advocated, y'all, was Black pride. In fact, he was one of the first to start saying Black as opposed to the word that was given, which was colored, that most people, even African Americans, called themselves, saying phrases like Black is beautiful. Now, one thing about him that, makes some people uncomfortable is particularly he pushed Black separatism, that Blacks should separate themselves from white society, not rely on the government or anybody else to help them, but make it themselves, economic self-sufficiency. So instead of desegregation, which a lot of people like Dr. King would favor, you had him believing in almost self-segregation. Also, too, he believed that African Americans should give up on the United States and move back to Africa. All right. Now, here's the picture that I had on there the other day. Sadly, the ship just covered it. I always love his hat, so he definitely knew how to, and he kind of stylized himself as almost kind of a general there. But you remember the Titanic, y'all, had been called the White Star Line and had not really allowed. In fact, there was only one African-American man on Titanic. He was a Haitian immigrant. He decided to create a ship line called Black Star Line that would help carry African Americans back and forth. Now, ultimately, he got in trouble for this. Was he guilty, or were they trying to basically stop this guy? That's a question a lot of historians ask. But they say that it was stock fraud, that he was selling shares that he didn't have, that he was taking money, and it was this Black Star Line that ultimately got him deported out of the United States. Now, a follower of his happened to be Malcolm X's father. Now, Malcolm X obviously wasn't born with that name, but Malcolm X in the 1950s, or maybe it was the late 40s, got busted for theft and other things and thrown into jail in Boston. While in jail, Malcolm converted to the Nation of Islam, okay, often called the Black Muslims. And he changed his name to X because he said he didn't know what his real name was. The name that he'd been given, Little, that his father had been given to them somewhere back there by slave masters. Now, because, he believed in a lot of the same things that Garvey did. Garvey plays, in some ways, a direct role in Malcolm X. Malcolm believed in a lot of the same things, maybe not so much the Back to Africa movement, but he definitely believed, at least for a while, in self-segregation African Americans moving together, not having anything really to do with what he sometimes even called the white devils. He was quite militant, very famous for the phrase, by any means necessary. So often, y'all, Malcolm of the 50s and 60s is sort of shown as a counterpoint to King. King believes in integration, right? King believes in peaceful protest to enact change. King welcomes other people, whites and others, to assist in this movement, whereas he believed, no, this was something we have to do ourselves. Now, ultimately, Malcolm got disenchanted with the Black Muslim movement. And after he, as a Muslim, visited Mecca, he became much more open to working with whites, no longer seeing them necessarily as a threat. And he ultimately came to leave the Nation of Islam over some issues about money that some of them were doing, some sex scandal involving one of the leaders of the Nation of Islam. And so he left. And when he condemned the movement, sadly, some of the Black Muslims had him murdered in New York, right in the presence of his family. If you ever get a chance to see the movie X with Denzel Washington, it is one of the great performances in history. You almost forget that that's Denzel, and that guy becomes Malcolm X to you. In fact, when I think of Malcolm now, I often think of him not as this guy, but the actor who played him, for which he won an Academy Award. Now, also, y'all, during the Red Scare, because some immigrants were involved in some of these attacks and things, that was used as a justification to pass our first real strict immigration laws. Now, the first one was in 1921. Now, when you look at this cartoon, which I think I have on your notes, look at how the immigrant is portrayed here, right? You've got the United States. It's got a wall to keep people out. But we've opened the door, right? And what is walking in? A bomb. Literally, the immigrant is a walking, ticking time bomb, right? You think of the Italian anarchists that they're basing this on. So if you were going to talk about the historical situation, the context for this, for your sourcing, you'd want to talk about the scare, the fact that there have been terrorist attacks during the time. Some of them had been by immigrants. And so as a result, fearing that more immigrants would mean more terrorism, we had tried to limit the number of people coming to. The point of view here, notice what it says: close the gate. In other words, let's not keep letting people like this in. Now, the immigrants that they targeted were white Europeans, but they were from the southern part of Europe, Spain, particularly Italy, Eastern Europe, what is Poland and Czechoslovakia and Greece and places like that. These weren't your Northern and Western Europeans who had been the first to settle after, obviously, Native Americans. Now, how we did this, y'all, was we were trying to maintain sort of America as it was in 1910. And so what we said was you would be allowed only to bring in, say, the percentage of Italians that were here in 1910. You'd only be allowed to bring in the number of Greeks who were here in 1910. The goal was to keep America a WASP nation. And man, I hate WASP, y'all. One of them got in my shoe. I had my shoe sitting out, and I put it on one morning before school. And I put my when I put my hand in the shoe, it stung me, and it stung me a couple times. My hand swelled up like a balloon. It was scary, so I don't like wasps. But this meant white, Anglo-Saxon, in other words, from Britain or Germany, Protestants, right? They were trying to maintain that. Now, later, they tightened this even further. And instead of the census of 1910 being the basis for how many people we let in, they go all the way to 1890, when we had even fewer Italians and Greeks and Jews and Russians here. All right, so we have that one here, 1910. And and so it's also, y'all, during the Red Scare, you do see nativism come back. The nativism that we had seen in the 1840s and 50s with the Irish, and to a lesser extent, fears of the Germans coming over. The Klan is reborn, largely due to the success of the movie Birth of a Nation, which painted them as sort of a hero, right? Or as heroes. So you see it come back. But this was a different Klan, y'all. Whereas the old Klan had been anti-black, anti-Republican, this Klan, y'all, was they're either more prejudiced or less prejudiced, because they were anti-foreign, period. In other words, anti-immigrant. Didn't matter what you were. They were now also anti-Catholic. They were also anti-Jewish, anti-communist, anti-pacifist, anti-bootlegger, anti-gambling, anti-birth control, and that was just a few of the things, right? Now, so they're either more prejudiced because they hate more people, or maybe you could say they're less prejudiced because they hate everybody now, basically, right? And so the Klan, y'all, their numbers got as high as 4 million people. And unlike the Klan of Reconstruction days, this Klan was just as popular in places like Indiana as it was in the South. They were growing. They had the support of a lot of people. They were able to march right down the streets of Washington, D.C., Klan men, Klan women, and even Klan babies in little Klan outfits. But then, y'all, a scandal really kind of destroyed them for quite a few years until the 1950s when they come back. A man by the name of Stevenson was head of the Indiana Klan. He booked a train trip. You know, in those days, you had beds and stuff on the train. He had his own little bed and stuff on there, and he brought along his woman's secretary. Well, during the course of the night, he not only raped her, but he bit her so badly. Yes, that's correct. He bit her so badly that she ended up dying. Now, this was a big scandal. They found out, of course, money had been stolen. They found out, of course, the sexual scandal. And why this was particularly harmful, y'all, is the Klan had painted itself as the protector of the white female, right? Its job was to protect the white female against all these foreigners and blacks and all these other people that wanted to ravage and savage our women. Well, it's kind of hard to say that when you're doing it yourself, right? And so when this came out about Stevenson and he ended up going to jail for this murder, it really caused a lot of people to back off, okay? And then, of course, when the Great Depression happens in 1929, 1930, we got a lot bigger things to worry about. But the Klan would disappear until the African-American civil rights movement of the 50s, and then we see it reborn, particularly in Mississippi and in Alabama, were two of the biggest places. And even, y'all, it made a reappearance in the 1970s here in Texas, down in Seabrook and in Pasadena. And this time, the Klan of the 70s, y'all, went after Asians, particularly Vietnamese fishermen and shrimpers, and some others like that. So when, you know, oftentimes, y'all, economic crises or things like that, you'll see them, you know, raise their heads and come back again. All righty. So I'm going to go ahead and pass these out to you guys. These notes, I kind of screwed up. Gee, big surprise, Mr. D. And what you're going to do, let me pass these out to y'all. I'll record next period. The conclusion of this, there's only a little bit that y'all are going to have to do on this. How much time we got, y'all? I know it's homeroom day. Ooh, not a lot of time. So I'll finish recording this later, but this is what y'all need to do. All right. You're going to take the first page here, right? You've already done this. I kind of screwed up my notes. You're going to take off the first couple of pages here. and you're going to tear it off. So take off those first 2 pages and go to where it's got a picture of Babe Ruth. Notice there's only one line here on the bottom of this page right after Marcus Garvey. Okay? You will just go ahead and attach those pages to the other page. Now notice I've already talked about Lindbergh, but what I've still got left to talk about, y'all, are the importance of sports in the 20s, some sports heroes, movie stars, and movie scandals, and some of the art issues and artists of the time too. So you'll just tear off those first 2 pages, and then you'll attach these pages to the previous page. Oops. I'm going to go ahead and pass around with stapler so y'all can do that. All right. The first 2 pages, just tear them off. You can throw them away in the recycling bin, and then you're going to staple these 2 pages to part 1. Okay? Yeah, put them on the back. Tear off the first 2 pages of that page of the sheet that I just gave you. Yeah, you got them already torn off? Yeah. All right, you can chuck that. Then you're going to take these 2 pages, starting with Babe Ruth, and you're going to attach them to it. Does that make sense? Okay. So yeah, y'all take off the first 2 pages, right? Chuck them, and then you're going to staple this to the back. I'll try to pass them out in class, but in case you're watching and you weren't here, you'll know what to do. All right, y'all. So staplers should be coming around. Okay, y'all. So religion in the 1920s. This is not on your notes. I apologize. Forgot to put that on there. We've talked about this a little bit in the context of talking about the Scopes monkey trial. In the 1920s, you had largely 2 groups fighting over religion. The modernists were people who tried to reconcile their religious beliefs with all the new evidence coming from evolution and scientific investigation. Those people included people like Harry Fosdick here, as you can see, a reverend, okay, and a modernist religious scholar. And then you had your fundamentalists, the people that had gotten the law passed, for example, in Tennessee that made it illegal to teach evolution. And your fundamentalists, y'all believe that the Bible was literally true. If it said God had created the earth in 6 days, well, then it was created in 6 days, as the book of Genesis said. And so they questioned the very notion of evolution. As we saw, they didn't want it being taught in schools, and this sets up the trial. But also, y'all, these fundamentalists believe that it was the changing nature of religion, these people who had fallen, so to speak, that were responsible for the decline in morals, for women being, going out drinking and smoking and engaging in premarital sex, and for, murders like the Bobby Franks murder by Leopold and Lowe, by the scandals in the Harding administration. They really felt because people were getting away from God, that in a way God was getting away from them, and that society was declining as a result. Okay. Now, in addition, there were several popular preachers who were really helped by the new medium of radio. It just didn't make sports heroes, which I'll talk about in just a sec. It made people into what they weren't televangelists. That comes in the 50s with television. People like Billy Graham and others like that. I guess they were radio evangelists or whatever. But you think about it, they could, with one radio broadcast, reach more people in a single sermon than they could in their entire lifetime of going around and giving, sermons to 500 people here and a couple hundred here. Now, Billy Sunday, who you just saw right there, Billy Sunday was a former baseball player. He went after gambling, he went after drinking, he went after dancing, and he did a lot of it in these giant revivals, which could be broadcast on radio as well. Now, Aimee Semple McPherson, shown here, was out in Los Angeles, in the land of Hollywood, where people were really thinking that's where society's going to pot. She had an amazingly ginormous church here, and she particularly used the radio. Here's a picture of her Angelus Temple, okay, that she preached from. And my mom remembers seeing her out there, and they would lower her, according to my mom, on wires down from like the ceiling. And with those giant sleeves that you see here, it was almost as if it were an angel descending from the heavens to give us revelation, right? And so there you see her. But her career was kind of messed up when it turned out she disappeared for some days. And then it turned out it was all about, well, she was having an affair and, you know, kind of messed up her image, so to speak. She particularly went after communists. She went after jazz music and all those kind of things. Now, this is where your notes start again, and this is the part that you want to write before we talk about the athletes. Radio, y'all, made, you know, local sports heroes become national heroes and, in a way, national role models, right? The most famous is, of course, Babe Ruth. And what an amazing story, right? The guy's an orphan. He's in an orphan school. The minister, the father, teaches him how to play baseball, and he has this absolutely natural ability. Until the record was broken by Hank Aaron in the 1970s, he had the record for most home runs, 714. He also had the record until 1961 of most home runs in a season, which was 60, which is absolutely amazing in the day. Some great stories about Babe, and his real name was George Herman Ruth. And no, the Baby Ruth bar is not named for him. It's named for actually President Cleveland's baby, which was named Ruth. Okay. But of course, he's the one that really makes the Yankees become super famous. He's part of what became known as Murderers Row. One of my favorite stories about him is when he allegedly called the shot. Now, he might have called shots and pointed to the fences in Yankee Stadium, which was nicknamed the house that Ruth built, but that he called the shot and then hit the home run where he pointed. But the story I heard goes something like this. They're playing, out there in a game, and a lot of the fans, they're playing out of town. A lot of the fans are calling Ruth all kinds of things, but particularly they're calling him the N-word. Now, he's not black, but they were using that, to go after him. And even apparently the pitcher of the team called him that or looked at it and mouthed the words at him. So Ruth, y'all, he points his finger right at the guy and he says, next hit is going down your throat, right? By pointing at him, you're like, look, Babe's calling the shot. And then what did he do? He didn't hit the guy with the ball, but he did hit it over the fence. So here you see him in 1927 hitting that 60th home run.
On September 30th, the next to last day of the season, needing just one more home run, he faced Tom Zachary of the Washington Senators.